A bloody gang war culminates in a massacre on Valentine's Day. The hunt for Chicago's most powerful crime boss begins.
This really grabs everybody's attention, right up to the president.
A baby's kidnapping keeps America in suspense. The child's father is American hero Charles Lindbergh. The case is shrouded in mystery. Traitor or hero? A lawyer fights to rehabilitate officers who planned to assassinate Hitler.
Post-war Germany without Fritz Bauer would probably have looked grim.
These spectacular crimes moved people and changed the world. Sarajevo, June the 28th, 1914. On this Sunday morning, the Austro-Hungarian heir to the throne and his wife are visiting the Bosnian capital. Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie reach the Sarajevo train station at 10:07. They ride toward the city hall in a motorcade where a festive reception is planned. Their route is along the Miljacka River. At 10:25, they are about half a mile from their goal. Everything is going according to plan. But an assassin lurks in the cheering crowd. He throws a bomb studded with nails and lead at the motorcade. People are injured. This is the place at the embankment where the bomb exploded in 1914. Historian Nicholas Moll has lived in Sarajevo for more than 15 years. He has meticulously worked through the events of that day.
There are various versions. Did Franz Ferdinand fend off the bomb with his arm, or did it fall on the back of the car? The fact is that the bomb falls behind the car and then explodes in front of the car behind it.
An escort officer is injured in the detonation, but Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie are spared. The motorcade continues towards City Hall. The attacker flees.
After the attacker throws the bomb, he jumps several meters down into the Miljacka River. But he's caught there by two policemen who arrest him and take him away. Due to the quick arrest, the situation seems to be under control, for the moment.
Investigating Judge Leo Pfeffer interrogates the attacker, a 19-year-old Bosnian Serb named Nedjeljko Kabrinovic. Pfeffer wants to uncover the background behind the attack. There is much evidence to suggest a political motive. Is Kabrinovic a member of a Serbian nationalist movement? The dual monarchy annexes Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1908. Serbia sees this as a provocation, since it has claims to the territory itself. In addition, there are Serbian factions in Bosnia-Herzegovina that aspire to a greater Serbian empire, a nation to unite all southern Slavs. In Austria-Hungary, the General Staff leadership has long advocated going to war against Belgrade. Many Serbs see the heir to the throne's visit to Sarajevo as a provocation.
The timing of the visit is disastrous. The 28th of June is the Serbian national and religious holiday of St. Vitus, and the visit taking place on that day is seen as a direct and obvious insult to the Serbs.
Following the failed attack, the heir to the throne and his wife arrive at City Hall. Franz Ferdinand decides to continue the visit. To avoid further attacks, he changes the route. The convoy will head for the garrison hospital rather than the National Museum. There, the couple want to visit the officer who was injured in the attack. But not everybody seems to know about the new route. At 10:45, the motorcade reaches the Latin Bridge. Here, they're supposed to keep driving straight on. Instead, they turn off, based on the original route. It's a momentous mistake.
The governor, who was sitting in the car with Franz Ferdinand, noticed the mistake and told the chauffeur to stop and go back. So the car with Franz Ferdinand in it stopped right here.
Another assassin is standing on the corner. He fires 2 shots. The first bullet hits the Duchess in the lower abdomen, and the second hits Franz Ferdinand in the neck. They die of their injuries shortly thereafter. The police arrest the shooter on the spot. He is Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old Bosnian-Serbian student. The assassination of the Archduke and his wife shocks Europe. The heir to the throne and his wife are buried in Austria. The assassination proves explosive in the politically charged region. Investigators are under enormous pressure. Yet the attackers are cautious with their statements.
The detainees each said they were working alone, but it could be assumed that they didn't act on their own. The question was, of course, was there a conspiracy behind it?
In the days following the assassinations, investigators arrest dozens of suspected Serbs. They discover that Princip and Kaprinovic were in contact with Danilo Ilic, a member of the Serbian terror organization Black Hand. The group is led by the chief of Serbian military intelligence, Dragutin Dimitrijevic.
The Black Hand's official name was Unification or Death. Its political goal was based on a Serbian nationalist program to unite all Serbs in one nation, the Kingdom of Serbia. So the Black Hand also had networks in Bosnia, plus people there who worked with the Black Hand.
Was Belgrade complicit in the attacks? What did the Serbian government around Prime Minister Pasic know? Despite a lack of evidence, Austria-Hungary considers Serbia to be obviously complicit. Reason enough to provoke a war with its South Slavic archenemy. Austria-Hungary gets backing from its ally when the German Empire writes it a blank check. If Austria-Hungary should attack the Kingdom of Serbia, the Germans guarantee their military support. Russia is on the side of Serbia. The Russian Empire is a member of a powerful alliance with France and the United Kingdom, known as the Triple Entente. Vienna and Berlin gamble that an attack will not trigger the great powers' mutual defense clause. Austria-Hungary gives Serbia an ultimatum that includes demands that are as intolerable as possible. As expected, several conditions are unacceptable to Serbia. Serbia lets the ultimatum expire. On July the 28th, 1914, the dual monarchy declares war on Serbia. Contrary to Austria-Hungary's and Germany's assumption, the Mutual Defense Clause takes effect, which means they are now engaged in a conflict with the Triple Entente. Europe finds itself in the First World War. It will cost nearly 17 million people their lives.
The question of whether the war would have happened anyway, without the crime, is really the million-dollar question. I think it's fair to say that the war was going to happen anyway. The two bullets, the crime, the assassination, undoubtedly provided a pretext, a way in which the war could start, and it undoubtedly affected the timing.
25 presumed conspirators are on trial for plotting to murder the heir to the throne and his wife. 3 of the accused are sentenced to death. 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip, a minor, is sentenced to 20 years in prison. It later turns out that the Black Hand did in fact support the attackers with weapons and logistics, and the Serbian government knew of their plans. The Sarajevo Assassination influenced the course of history like no other event. It marks the beginning of a political crisis that will culminate in the First World War. Chicago, February 14th, 1929. A bloody massacre takes place in a garage in the northern part of the city on Valentine's Day morning. The victim's murder looks like an execution.
The St. Valentine's Day massacre, because 7 people were gunned down in a small space in cold blood with machine guns, this really grabs everybody's attention, right up to the president.
Author John Binder has researched the history of organized crime in Chicago. He knows what really happened at the scene of the massacre.
Since 5 of the 7 men in the garage were members of the North Side Gang, one was a mechanic who worked for the North Side Gang, they concluded pretty quickly that it was another episode in Chicago's somewhat long-running gang war.
Organized crime rules the city in the 1920s. Yet the history of the mafia in America goes back much farther. Beginning in the mid-19th century, millions of immigrants come to the United States from Europe, fleeing poverty, war, and hunger in hopes of a better life. Yet the immigrants, among them Germans, Poles, Irish, and Italians, experience unemployment and discrimination in their new home. They form criminal factions in these environments. Initially, their influence is restricted to individual neighborhoods in the major cities. This all changes in 1920, when the government forbids the manufacture and sale of alcohol. With this prohibition, the government wants to battle not just the people's drugs, but also crime and corruption. Yet, this intervention doesn't have the desired effect.
Passing a law in Washington, D.C. isn't going to make them stop drinking. So you still had a public demand, and by making the production and sale, transportation, et cetera, essentially the liquor industry, by making it illegal during Prohibition, you're putting it in the hands of organized crime.
They began to expand their operations. So rather than just being local at the street or neighborhood level, it becomes citywide or statewide or even interstate. Crime becomes what we would now say organized.
The local police authorities can't stop people from selling illegal alcohol. Their jurisdiction often ends at their city border. There is no money or staff at the federal level to pursue investigations. This means the gangs have free rein to run their multi-million-dollar businesses. 2 of the gangs are direct competitors: the North Side Gang in northern Chicago and the Chicago Outfit in the south part of the city. Chicago is controlled by the mafia. Murders are everyday occurrences in the course of the brutal gang war.
The violence is largely a series of executions or assassinations. It's peripheral. It's a means to that end. They use that to achieve the goal of making money.
In the mid-1920s, Alphonse Gabriel, better known as Al Capone, takes over leadership of the Chicago Outfit. The charismatic son of Italian immigrants quickly gains power.
Once Al Capone took control of the gang in 1925, things started to really escalate. Capone had a large network of people that surrounded him and protected him. And he knew well enough that he would never want to commit a crime on his own. He would have other people do it. And it was a matter of tracing that back to him, which was almost impossible to do at the time.
Al Capone advances to become the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago. He earns millions and bribes local politicians and policemen. He's a gangster boss with two faces. Capone seeks publicity and supports poor communities, thereby buying their loyalty. But behind the benevolent facade is an unscrupulous businessman.
He's very good at his chosen profession, which is being a gangster, which means running these illegal businesses to make money for the gang. And that gang is also involved in narcotics, gambling, prostitution, some labor racketeering, and also in the process, hurting or threatening to hurt people so that he and his gang can have their way.
Though the police hold Al Capone responsible for numerous assassinations, they can't prove a single one. On February the 14th, 1929, the gang war reaches its bloody culmination in the North Side garage.
Two cars arrive about 10:15 to 10:30 in the morning, where the men in them are posing as police officers. They go in dressed as police officers. They act like it's a police raid. They put everybody up against the wall, take their guns from them, and then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose.
The purported policemen are brutal gangsters. They virtually riddle the men with bullets. The gruesome St. Valentine's Day massacre shocks America.
It was brutal overkill. They used the Thompson submachine gun. They were also known as the Chicago typewriter because of how fast they would shoot. These were fully automatic weapons. They shot .45 caliber ACP bullets, and they came in a 20-round stick magazine or a 50 or 100-round drum magazine.
Witnesses see Fred "Killer" Burke near the crime scene. Though the mafia boss is supposed to have worked for Al Capone in the past, there is no proof that ties him to the massacre. Still, the press suspects that Al Capone is behind the crime.
There was a large outcry after St. Valentine's Day massacre that the federal government increased its efforts in terms of trying to get Al Capone, trying to get him convicted and sent to prison.
American President Herbert Hoover gets involved and instructs the tax authorities to convict Al Capone.
If we can't prove that he ordered murders, we can go after his money because he clearly is living beyond the amount of money that he's declaring to us in whatever taxes he does return.
The IRS has been collecting information on Al Capone since 1929. His criminal empire is an opaque network of countless cash flows. Tax investigator Frank Wilson heads the inquiry. He's considered particularly tough. Day and night, he and his team work through millions of documents, searching for evidence that could incriminate Capone.
You have to follow the money. Capone was very careful not to leave a paper trail. No accounting books, no letters, no notes. They had to use what we would now call forensic accounting. You have to trace all the little links that might exist between Capone and his known associates to the associates that we don't yet know about and their businesses. So you have to trickle down and find all these interlinking documents and individuals.
It's a tedious process. The tax investigators make slow progress. Yet, in 1931, the police achieve an unexpected breakthrough. They catch Fred "Killer" Burke on a farm. The investigators find an entire arsenal in his bungalow, including 2 Thompson submachine guns. They could be the murder weapons used in the St. Valentine's Day massacre. But to prove it, they need a renowned forensic specialist.
Calvin Goddard was brought in to the St. Valentine's Day case, and it was his work, using a sort of comparison microscope, that proved that the guns had been used to kill the victims. And so really what we now consider to be forensic ballistics really dates back to that era.
Forensic ballistics prove that they were the weapons used in the massacre. But not even Fred Killer Burke implicates Al Capone. The background to the St. Valentine's Day massacre remains unclear. Frank Wilson and his team are more successful. A nondescript cash account book provides investigators with a new lead. $17,500 has supposedly been transferred to Al Capone from a casino. It's a starting point. The investigators identify additional business partners and get testimony that implicates the mob boss. They succeed at doing what previously seemed impossible, putting a stop to Al Capone's game. On November the 24th, 1931, a federal court sentences him to 11 years in prison for tax evasion. The Chicago mafia boss has to spend most of his time on the infamous island of Alcatraz.
He's released early in 1939 because of his mental state. He was already suffering from an advanced case of syphilis, and the authorities decided that this has so messed up his brain that, that he's not the same man he was before.
Al Capone spends the final years of his life a recluse in Florida. In 1947, he dies following a stroke. Ultimately, it's the tax fraud investigation that proves his downfall. But the 1929 Valentine's Day murders mark the turning point. The gruesome massacre goes down in American criminal history and ignites the battle against organized crime. As a result, the FBI is strategically expanded to fight crime throughout the country.
In America, there are so many different legal jurisdictions, local, county, state. You really, in order to deal with organized crime, you need a federal institution that has the power to cross those boundaries. And the Capone case was part of what built the FBI into a national crime-fighting and effective agency.
Until the Valentine's Day massacre, Al Capone is considered untouchable. Though there is no proof that he is responsible for the murders, the mob boss's image crumbles. Ultimately, it's tax evasion that proves his downfall. Investigation of tax evasion has proven itself and is used by agents even today. On the evening of March the 1st, 1932, in New Jersey, nursemaid Betty Gow goes to check on Charlie. The baby is 20 months old and has a cold. 3 hours have passed since she put him to bed. But then comes a shock.
Colonel! Colonel!
The child has disappeared without a trace. He's the baby of Anne Morrow and Charles Lindbergh. The famous pilot is an American hero. In 1927, he was the first person to fly solo and non-stop across the Atlantic.
After World War I, the United States emerged as a superpower, and he became the symbol of that. That was the context in which the child disappeared. And it resulted in the most expensive, widespread search for the kidnapper that the country had ever experienced.
Charles Lindbergh immediately calls the authorities. The New Jersey State Police are responsible. That same evening, they begin securing evidence at the Lindbergh residence. Norman Schwarzkopf heads the investigation. He follows the most important tip: a ransom demand for $50,000. The kidnapper has left it in the room. The note is written in broken English and contains an unusual mark. The writer mentions not just himself, but us. For Lindbergh and the police, it's an indication that a gang is behind the kidnapping. Hundreds of officers comb through the expansive property. The pressure is immense. The media pounces on the case.
The kidnapping of the firstborn son of aviator Charles Lindbergh is destined to be front-page news.
Investigators discover a ladder leading up to the child's room. It's an important piece of evidence. But a crowd of media representatives hinders the investigators' work.
And they wound up trampling on evidence, footprints and tire tracks, ruining a lot of it.
The kidnapping of the Lindbergh baby is now a cover story. Head police officer Schwarzkopf involves Lindbergh in the investigations and even lets him make many decisions. And things get even more bizarre. John Condon, a retired teacher from the Bronx, gets involved in the case.
And all of a sudden, here comes Condon, who said, I just placed an ad on my own in this local paper, and the next day I got a response, which I'm sure is genuine, from the kidnap gang.
The written response contains the same mark as the ransom note.
He was invited immediately to the New Jersey farmhouse to meet with Lindbergh. The whole thing was very odd, and the police did not ever trust Condon.
But Lindbergh involves Condon as a mediator. He's asked to organize a meeting with the extortionists, without the police. On March the 12th, 1932, Condon meets the presumed kidnapper in a cemetery in the Bronx. He says the child is in his care. As proof, he hands over a piece of the child's clothing. The Lindberghs confirm its authenticity. A handoff will take place to save the child's life. The ransom money consists of gold certificates, dollar bills that are tied to the value of gold. The police register every serial number so they can later trace the ransom money. The handoff is to again take place in a cemetery in New York without police.
Lindbergh told the police that he didn't want them doing any surveillance, that he didn't want the New Jersey police there, he didn't want the New York police there. He would just be sitting in a car 200 feet away as this transpired.
Again, Condon meets the supposed kidnapper. He hands him the ransom money and receives a note in exchange with an address where the child can presumably be found. The next day, the police search feverishly for the kidnapped baby in Massachusetts. But they are greatly disappointed. There's no sign of Charles Jr. anywhere. On May the 12th, 1932, a truck driver makes a grisly discovery just a few miles from the Lindbergh property. He discovers the body of a child in a forest. The missing Lindbergh baby seems to have been brutally murdered. The news shatters America, and the kidnapping ends in a national trauma.
There was a long article in a major paper criticizing the police that May of '32, just after the body was found, for how much they had bungled this case. And they felt that pressure.
But just 2.5 years after the kidnapping, there's a new clue. A man pays at a gas station in New York with a gold certificate. But the government has already pulled the banknotes out of circulation. The employee notes the customer's license plate. The police are able to trace the bill to the ransom money and identify its owner, German immigrant Richard Hauptmann. Investigators order a house search and find a majority of the ransom money. They seem to have caught the Lindbergh baby's killer. But Hauptmann maintains his innocence. He says he got the money from a certain Isidor Fisch, who has since died. The police don't believe the suspect's testimony. The trial of Richard Hauptmann begins on January 3rd, 1935 in Flemington, New Jersey. 700 journalists are reporting from the small town. It's a media frenzy the likes of which America has rarely seen.
The atmosphere at that trial was compared to a circus, and 90% of the press was convinced from day one that this was the perpetrator.
Lindbergh appears as a witness at the trial, but the judge allows him to sit at the prosecutor's table.
That's outrageous. He was a star witness for the prosecution. It put the thumb on the scale for the jury.
Lindbergh says that, without a doubt, he recognizes Hauptmann's voice as the voice of the man from the cemetery. But Lindbergh was 200 feet away from the handoff at the time.
Problem with that is no one could ID a voice from that distance 2 years later. You probably couldn't even do it a month later. So that was absurd.
It is still a mystery why Lindbergh insisted on this point. But Condon also testifies in court that he recognizes Hauptmann, though he wasn't able to during a pre-trial police interrogation. The burden of proof against Hauptmann keeps getting more overwhelming.
The state had an expert who identified one rail of the ladder with a floorboard in Hauptmann's landlord's attic and said they came from the same tree. And that was convincing to that jury. There's a controversy about is whether his visual examination was accurate.
The ladder that the perpetrator used to get into the house is closely examined once more. The analysis is carried out by specialist Erastus Hudson.
He found over 500 fingerprints, and many of them were because the police and the reporters mishandled the ladder. But when it was taken apart, there was a set of prints on an inside joint that could have only been made by the person who constructed the ladder. And when they arrested Hauptmann, Dr. Hudson called the police and said, "Have you checked his fingerprints against the ones you found on an inside joint?" And they checked them after that, and they said they don't match. And he said, "You've got the wrong guy."
The public prosecutor offers to waive the death penalty if the accused confesses, but Hauptmann refuses. The trial lasts a month before the final judgment is made. Jurors find Hauptmann guilty. He is executed on April 3rd, 1936.
I'm hoping to see Hauptmann posthumously exonerated, and so I would like to see the open question of the whether the wood is identical resolved by a wood DNA test. The state of New Jersey still has both pieces of wood, so it could be done.
It's just one of the questions that the case leaves open. The judicial system has no interest in a revision, but they see a need for action. The Lindbergh Law comes into effect.
The law changes to make child abduction a federal crime, and that meant that the FBI was enabled to investigate child abductions and, in fact, any kidnapping across state lines thereafter.
The Lindbergh kidnapping, a case that holds an entire nation in suspense. What influence did public pressure and the media, not to mention Lindbergh himself, have on the outcome of the case? Many legal experts today are critical of the trial and Richard Hauptmann's death sentence. There is still doubt about whether he was guilty. July 20th, 1944, East Prussia. General Staff Officer Klaus Schenk Graf von Stauffenberg arrives at the Führer's headquarters, known as Wolf's Lair. He is part of a group of conspirators who want to kill Adolf Hitler. It's already becoming apparent that the German Reich will lose the Second World War. The officers want to end the war as quickly as possible. The bomb explodes at 12:42 p.m. It's an attempted assassination of Adolf Hitler. 4 people are killed in the attack, and more are injured. Stauffenberg immediately returns to Berlin. He and his accomplices now want to put their plans for a coup into action. Operation Valkyrie has been planned long beforehand. Upon Hitler's death, the military is to take over power in Berlin. One man is key to this plan, Otto Ernst Remer. He knows nothing about the conspiracy. The officer heads the Guard battalion in Berlin. Now he is to advance plans for a military coup. Remer receives this order from a superior, Lieutenant General Paul von Haase, himself one of the conspirators.
He and his people were meant to seal off the government quarters and arrest leading representatives of the National Socialist State. He embarked on this mission and visited Goebbels, who informed him that Hitler was alive. He arranged for a telephone call between Remer and Hitler in Wolf's Lair, so Remer would know Hitler had survived the attack.
I recognize your voice.
And he was commissioned by Hitler to crush the attempted coup.
The coup fails. The resistance fighters are arrested. Stauffenberg and 3 other conspirators are summarily executed. The Nazi propaganda machine praises Remer for quelling the attempted coup. He is promoted to Major General. Scarcely 9 months later, Germany lies in ruins. World War II is lost and the fate of the criminal Nazi regime is sealed. Yet, the public's view of the July 20th assassination attempt does not change right away.
In 1945, people already openly knew and saw the horrible crimes that this regime had perpetrated. And still, the public didn't consider the conspirators to be heroes at this point. They saw them as absolute criminals.
A 1951 survey shows that only 1/3 of Germany views the July 20th attempt at resistance as positive. In 1949, Otto Ernst Remer takes part in the establishment of the SRP party. It's one of many right-wing nationalist factions in post-war Germany.
The SRP, the Socialist Reich Party, was probably the most extreme and radical of them, and they unashamedly subscribed to National Socialism. And Remer was their poster boy.
The atmosphere that the end of denazification creates really emboldens right-wing individuals like Remer to make their views publicly known and to express them as freely as they wish.
On May the 3rd, 1951, at a campaign event in Lower Saxony, Remer describes the conspirators as traitors. Interior Minister Robert Lehr files a legal complaint charging him with malicious defamation. The case goes to the district court in Braunschweig. Attorney General Fritz Bauer immediately recognizes the far-reaching consequences that convicting Remer could bring. Fritz Bauer is a legal expert who lived in Germany until 1936, when, as a Jew and a social democrat, he fled into exile. He returns in 1949 with a mission.
He was firmly convinced that a democracy needs democrats. It would not be possible to repress and forget what happened.
He wanted to rehabilitate the attempted assassins of July 20th, and he wanted to legitimize the right to resist in general.
The Remer trial writes legal history, because it will also reach a decision regarding public perception of the July 20th act of resistance. On March the 7th, 1952, the trial against Otto Ernst Remer begins.
This really was a groundbreaking trial, which really fundamentally altered perceptions of justice in post-war Germany.
Whereas Remer's far-right supporters are hoping for acquittal, the resistance fighters' families want justice for their loved ones.
It's a very tense atmosphere that is really looking ahead to the future. How do we deal with this? How can the nation manage to build and create a positive future from the experiences of this terrible past?
Historians and experts speak during the 4 days of the proceedings. One topic of discussion is the question of whether the oath to the Führer was legally binding. Starting in 1934, every soldier had to swear loyalty to Hitler. Did the resistance fighters therefore commit high treason? In his closing argument, Fritz Bauer argues that one cannot commit high treason when the state is illegitimate.
Because you cannot betray a state that is criminal. It has betrayed its own people. It is criminal. And those who support such a state are themselves criminal.
On March the 15th, 1952, the court sentences Remer to 3 months in prison. However, he manages to flee the country. Still, his sentence is of major importance. It legally rehabilitates the resistance fighters of July 20th. Their wives retrospectively receive widows' pensions.
It was a turning point for the family members, simply from a material point of view and with a view to their social standing.
The Remer trial enshrines in German law the right to resist. So it's a very significant moment, because what it means is to plot against an existing regime under certain circumstances will be seen as a valid and legal thing to do.
For Fritz Bauer, this success is merely a partial victory. He continues to fight for a democratic society and to pursue the Nazis' crimes before the law.
Post-war Germany without Fritz Bauer would probably have looked grim. The Federal Republic owes him a great deal.
The Remer trial. an important step in the nation's examination of its National Socialist past, and a landmark decision for German democracy.